Zanil was only 24, a nurse in training, living with her widowed mother, Miriam, in a small but warm apartment in Nairobi. Her late father had left it for them, and it had always been their safe place. Zanil and her mother were close. They cooked together, laughed over tea, and shared stories about her father. But everything changed when Miriam met Patrick. At first, Patrick seemed polite and helpful. He fixed things around the house and always brought gifts. But soon his charm faded. He started making comments about Zanil's bad attitude and how she spent too much time at the hospital. Slowly, he began to control everything: what they ate, how they talked, even what music played in the house. Miriam, blinded by his charm, started siding with him every time there was an argument. Zanil tried to keep the peace, hoping her mother would see through him. But one night, after a long hospital shift, she came home exhausted to find her bags neatly packed by the door. Confused, she looked up and saw her mother standing beside Patrick. Miriam's face was cold. "You're an adult now, Zanil. It's time you find your own place," she said. Zanil froze. "Mama, what are you saying? This is my home." Her voice cracked, but Miriam wouldn't meet her eyes. Patrick just smirked. As rain began to pour outside, Zanil picked up her suitcase and her father's old photo, the only piece of comfort she had left. She stepped out into the storm, heartbroken, realizing the home that once felt full of love now belonged to strangers. Zanil found a small single room not far from the hospital. It wasn't much, just a thin mattress on the floor, a cracked window that let in dust, and a flickering bulb that barely lit the space. The walls were damp, and at night she could hear the sounds of the city, shouting, music, the rumble of Matatus passing by. It was nothing like the cozy home she had grown up in. Still, it was all she could afford. Every night after her shifts, she came back tired and drained. She'd sit on the edge of her mattress, staring at her father's photo resting on a small stool beside her bed. Sometimes she whispered, "I'm trying, Papa." But when the lights went out, the silence became too heavy. That's when the tears came. She cried quietly, replaying her mother's cold words in her head. "You're an adult now. You should find your own place." No matter how hard she tried, those words refused to leave her. At the hospital, Zanil wore her brightest smile. Her co-workers joked and laughed during breaks, but she stayed quiet, pretending everything was fine. When someone asked how she was, she'd just say, "I'm okay, just tired." Nobody knew the truth, that she hadn't had a real meal in days, that every night felt like heartbreak all over again. To keep herself from thinking too much, she started taking extra shifts on weekends. The long hours kept her busy, and the exhaustion helped her sleep. She told herself she was doing it for experience, but deep down, it was to avoid the loneliness waiting in that little room. When payday came, Zanil didn't spend her money on new clothes or nice food like others did. Instead, she saved every shilling carefully in a small metal box hidden under her mattress. She didn't know exactly why, maybe for a better place someday, maybe for something more. But deep inside, something had started to grow in her. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, a quiet promise to herself. Some nights, as she walked back to her room under the dim streetlights, she would think about her mother and Patrick. Were they happy? Did her mother ever think about her? The thought cut deep, but she pushed it away. One day, she told herself, her mother would remember what she had done, the night she chose a man over her own daughter. Zanil looked at the city lights from her small window and whispered to herself, "One day, I'll make her see what she threw away." It wasn't a threat. It was a vow, calm, steady, and burning deep in her heart. She didn't know how or when, but she knew the day would come. For now, all she could do was survive the nights that kept breaking her. One shift, one tear, one silent promise at a time. One quiet evening after her shift, Zanil stopped by the bank to handle some paperwork about her late father's pension. She'd been putting it off for months, not because she was lazy, but because anything that reminded her of him still hurt too much. The man at the counter, a polite banker with glasses, took her documents and asked her to wait while he checked the records. Zanil sat nervously, tapping her fingers on her file, staring at the polished floor. She had no idea her life was about to change completely. After a few minutes, the banker looked up from his computer and called her over. "Miss Zanil Odieno, I just need to confirm something," he said, flipping through a stack of papers. "You are the legal heir to your father's estate, correct?" Zanil frowned. "I think my mother handled everything after he passed," she replied. The banker shook his head gently. "Actually, your father registered the property under your name before he died. It's all here in the records, the apartment, the land title, everything." For a moment, Zanil just stood there, staring at him. "I'm sorry, what do you mean under my name?" she asked softly. The banker turned the document toward her. There it was, her full name written clearly on the title deed, signed and sealed years ago by her father. Her chest tightened as she took the papers in her trembling hand. It didn't make sense. All this time, she had believed the apartment belonged to her mother, the same home she'd been thrown out of like she was nothing. Yet here it was in black and white. Her father had made sure it would always belong to her. He had trusted her, protected her even after death. Zanil walked out of the bank slowly, the documents clutched against her chest as the evening breeze brushed her face. She stopped by the roadside, feeling the world spin a little. The city noises faded. All she could think about was the memory of her father, the way he used to call her his bright girl, the one he wanted to have a secure future. Tears filled her eyes, not just from sadness, but from the realization that he had loved her enough to think ahead. Her heart ached when she remembered how easily her mother had turned her away, all while living in the home that was legally hers. The betrayal cut deeper now, but so did the clarity. The pain that had once made her feel powerless slowly started to turn into something else, strength. That night, back in her tiny room, Zanil laid the papers carefully beside her father's photo. She looked at his smile and whispered, "You always knew, didn't you?" A calmness she hadn't felt in months washed over her. For the first time since being thrown out, she didn't feel lost. She knew what she had to do. The tears stopped. Her heartbreak was still there, but underneath it, a quiet determination began to rise, steady, patient, and unstoppable. Zanil didn't act right away. She could have gone to the apartment the moment she learned the truth, but something inside her told her to wait. Instead, she went quiet, calm, patient, and observant. She still went to work, still smiled when her coworkers joked, but her mind was elsewhere. Every night, she reread the property papers, feeling their weight in her hand. She didn't want revenge fueled by anger. She wanted something that would speak for itself. Weeks passed, and through a mutual friend who lived near her old neighborhood, Zanil started hearing things. Patrick had lost his job months ago. He spent most of his days drinking at a small bar near the bus stop, coming home late and shouting at Miriam over small things. The same man who once stood tall and smug in her father's living room was now broke and bitter. Zanil listened quietly, never asking for details, but every word stayed with her. Her friend told her how Miriam had started selling her jewelry to pay the bills, even pawning her wedding ring. "She's always defending him," the friend said. "People try to tell her to leave, but she just says he's going through a hard time." Zanil's heart twisted. A part of her felt angry that her mother had chosen this path, angry that she had thrown away everything for a man who was now dragging her down. But another part of her felt pity. Miriam had been blinded by the kind of love that destroys quietly. Zanil knew her mother wasn't evil. She was weak in the way people sometimes are when they're desperate not to be alone. At night, Zanil would sit by her small window, watching the lights of Nairobi flicker in the distance. She thought about showing up, handing her mother the documents, and telling her the truth. She imagined the shock on Miriam's face, the guilt, the tears. But every time that thought came, she stopped herself. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about timing. Zanil understood something her younger self didn't. Silence can be powerful. Letting people face the consequences of their choices without saying a word often hurts more than shouting ever could. So she waited. She focused on her work, built her savings, and slowly started fixing her own life. The pain in her heart hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into strength. She no longer cried at night. Instead, she planned quietly, patiently, like someone who knew her time would come. Sometimes she'd walk past her old neighborhood, just close enough to see the apartment building from a distance. The windows were dark, the paint peeling, the garden unkept. It didn't look like home anymore, and maybe that was okay. Zanil turned away each time, her face calm. She didn't need to announce her next move. When the time came, her silence, steady and deliberate, would say everything she needed to. About a month later, Miriam was sitting at the kitchen table when she noticed an envelope slipped under the door. It was from the property management company. She opened it casually, expecting another routine notice about maintenance or rent. But the bold letters at the top made her heart skip. Notice of ownership change. New landlord requests meeting regarding lease. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the letter again. New landlord, she murmured. That couldn't be right. She had lived in this apartment for years. It was her late husband's home. Confused, she reached for her phone and called the management office right away. "Hello," she said quickly. "There must be a mistake. I received a letter saying there's a new landlord. But this house belongs to my late husband. Who is this new owner you're talking about?" The woman on the other end spoke politely but firmly. "Ma'am, according to our records, the property ownership has been verified and updated. The legal owner is now Ms. Zanil Odieno." Miriam froze. For a few seconds, she didn't even breathe. "Zanil?" she whispered, as if saying the name too loud would make it more real. The agent continued, "Yes, ma'am. She's requested a meeting regarding the current lease agreement. Would you like me to schedule one?" But Miriam wasn't listening anymore. She ended the call, her mind spinning. How could her daughter, the same girl she had thrown out, be the owner of the apartment? She felt her throat tighten, her heart pounding as the memory of that night flashed in her mind. The rain, the suitcase, the coldness in her own voice. She rushed to the living room, waving the letter in her hand. "Patrick," she called out. He was sprawled on the couch, a half-empty beer bottle on the table. He looked up lazily. "What now?" he muttered. "Read this," she snapped, tossing the paper at him. He scanned the letter, his eyebrows rising slowly before a smirk appeared on his face. "So your daughter owns this place now?" he said, leaning back with a laugh. "Guess that means we're her tenants, huh?" Miriam's face flushed with shame. Patrick's words stung more than any insult. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, a mix of humiliation and guilt. She wanted to shout at him, to tell him it wasn't true, but deep down she knew it made sense. Zanil's father had always adored her, always said she'd have a secure future. Miriam had just never cared enough to ask what he meant by that. Patrick kept laughing, shaking his head. "Well, maybe your little nurse has some brains after all. Too bad you picked the wrong side." Miriam turned away, her hands trembling. She sat back down, staring blankly at the letter. The apartment suddenly felt colder, quieter, heavier. For the first time, she realized the truth wasn't just about losing a home. It was about losing her daughter and the dignity she had thrown away with her. The next morning, Zanil was at the hospital, busy checking on patients when she heard someone shouting her name from down the corridor. The voice was loud, angry, and painfully familiar. She froze for a second, then looked up. It was her mother. Miriam was walking fast, her face red, the crumpled notice letter clutched tightly in her hand. Nurses and patients turned to look as she stormed in, her heels echoing on the tiles. "Zanil," she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "You planned this, didn't you? You wanted to embarrass me. You think this is funny?" The whole hallway went quiet. Zanil took a slow breath and stepped forward, her expression calm. She looked tired, not from work, but from carrying months of pain. "Mama," she said softly, "please calm down. We can talk outside." But Miriam wasn't listening. "Don't tell me to calm down," she snapped. "You went behind my back. You stole the house, my house." Zanil blinked slowly, her voice steady. "No, Mama, I didn't steal anything. You just forgot whose name was on the deed." The words hit like a slap. Miriam stared at her, speechless for a moment. "That's not true," she whispered, shaking her head. "I did everything for you. I raised you alone. I worked myself to the bone after your father died." Her voice cracked, the anger starting to crumble into hurt. Zanil swallowed hard. "Yes, you did," she said quietly, "and I'm grateful for that. But when I needed you most, when I came home crying and broken, you chose him instead of me." Her tone was soft, but the truth in her voice cut deep. "You did everything for me, except love me when it mattered." A heavy silence filled the corridor. The nurses standing nearby lowered their eyes. Even the patients watching from their beds didn't make a sound. Miriam's lips trembled, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. For the first time, she looked smaller, not the strong mother Zanil had grown up with, but a woman who had made one too many wrong choices. "You don't understand," Miriam began, but her voice broke completely. Zanil shook her head gently. "I understand more than you think. You didn't lose the house because of me, Mama. You lost it the day you stopped being my mother." Miriam stood there for a long second, her hand still gripping the letter. The words hung in the air like a weight pressing on both of them. Then, without saying another word, she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked weakly this time, her shoulders shaking as she pushed through the crowd. Zanil watched her go, her heart heavy but steady. She didn't feel proud or victorious, just sad. When the corridor finally returned to its normal buzz, she quietly turned back to her patients, her hands still trembling slightly. The confrontation had ended, but the pain lingered, quieter now but real and deep. 2 weeks later, the final eviction notice arrived at the apartment. It was official and stamped by the authorities. They had 14 days to leave. Miriam's hands shook as she read it, but Patrick just laughed. "She's bluffing," he said, throwing the paper onto the table. "Your little girl doesn't have the guts to do this." But Zanil wasn't bluffing. She had followed every legal step carefully. The property was hers by law, and the time for waiting had passed. She had given them enough chances to leave peacefully. Now the system would speak for her. As the deadline drew near, Miriam barely slept. She tried calling Zanil several times, but every call went unanswered. Patrick, on the other hand, kept drinking, cursing under his breath, and blaming Miriam for everything. "If you had handled your daughter better, we wouldn't be in this mess," he snapped. Miriam just sat there, tears in her eyes, staring at the walls that once felt like home but now carried nothing but shame. On the morning the eviction was to be enforced, 2 officers arrived at the building. Neighbors peeked from their doors, whispering as they watched the scene unfold. Miriam rushed to the door, pleading, "Please, just give us a few more days. She'll change her mind, I know she will." One of the officers shook his head politely. "Ma'am, we're just here to follow court orders." Then a calm voice came from behind them. No, they're doing the right thing. Everyone turned. Zanil was standing at the entrance, holding a brown envelope of legal papers. She looked composed, dressed in her nurse's uniform, but her eyes told a story of sleepless nights and quiet strength. Miriam's legs gave way as she fell to her knees, sobbing. Please, Zanil, don't do this. He has nowhere to go, she cried, glancing desperately at Patrick. Zanil's eyes moved to him, the man who had ruined their family, who had stood smirking as she was thrown out into the rain. He looked older now, rougher, his arrogance fading. She spoke firmly, her voice calm but cold. He can go wherever he wants. But this is my father's home. Patrick sneered, trying to save face. Keep your stupid house. It's falling apart anyway, he muttered, grabbing a bag from the couch. As he stormed past, he bumped Zanil's shoulder and spat. You're just like your father, too proud for your own good. Zanil didn't flinch. She stood still, watching as he disappeared down the street, his curses echoing in the air. Miriam stayed on the floor, crying softly. Zanil, I didn't mean for things to end like this, she whispered. Zanil's voice softened slightly. Neither did I, Mama. But some things have to end for peace to return. As the officers helped Miriam gather her things, Zanil turned away, walking toward the window. She took a deep breath, the weight of years finally lifting from her chest. The home that once threw her out was now hers again, not through revenge, but through justice. After the eviction, the apartment was completely silent. The door clicked shut behind the officers, and for the first time in a long while, Zanil was alone in her father's home. She stood still for a few seconds, just listening to the emptiness. The rooms that had once echoed with shouting and anger were now quiet, almost too quiet. She walked slowly from room to room, her fingers brushing over the faded walls, the broken curtain rods, and the stains on the floor. Every corner carried a memory. In the living room, she could almost hear her father's laughter again, the way he used to tell stories after dinner. She could picture her mother in the kitchen, humming softly while cooking, before everything changed. The smell of home had faded long ago, replaced by the dull scent of dust and old paint. But as Zanil looked around, she felt something she hadn't felt here in years, peace. She opened the windows wide and let the sunlight pour in. The breeze carried the city's sounds, matatas honking, children playing, vendors shouting on the street. Nairobi was alive, and somehow so was she. The next few days, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She scrubbed every corner, mopped every floor, and painted every wall fresh white. The cracked ceiling got patched, the old curtains were replaced with new ones she bought from a street vendor, and the broken light bulbs were changed. She wanted the apartment to breathe again, to feel alive, not haunted by betrayal, but healed by effort and love. As she worked, she played her favorite old songs from her father's radio, the same one she had kept all these years. The music echoed softly through the rooms, and for once, it didn't make her sad. It made her feel grounded, like she was rewriting her own story, one brushstroke at a time. Sometimes she'd pause, wipe the sweat from her forehead, and glance at the framed photo of her father resting on a chair. His kind smile reminded her why she had fought so hard to reclaim this space. He had wanted this home to protect her, and now it finally did. When everything was finally done, Zanil stood in the middle of the living room. The walls were bright again, the air smelled clean, and the space felt open and new. She picked up her father's photo and hung it carefully on the wall, right where it used to be. For a moment, she just stared at it, smiling through tears. "This is yours again, Papa," she whispered. "And it's mine too." As the evening light filtered through the windows, the apartment no longer felt empty. It didn't echo with pain anymore. It was filled with quiet strength, forgiveness, and something even more powerful, peace. Several months passed, and life slowly settled into rhythm again for Zanil. She spent her days at the hospital, her evenings in the now peaceful apartment, and her weekends tending to the small balcony garden she'd started. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. She was finally at peace. One rainy afternoon, just as she was making tea, there was a soft knock on the door. Zanil frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She wiped her hands and walked to the door, opening it carefully. Her heart skipped. Standing there, drenched from the rain, was her mother. Miriam looked nothing like the woman she used to be. Her hair was messy and streaked with gray, her clothes worn out, and her face tired and pale. She looked smaller, weaker, as if life had slowly drained her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the rain filled the silence between them. "Mama," Zanil finally said, her voice low but steady. Miriam swallowed hard. "Zanil, please," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go. Patrick, he left me. He found someone else." Her eyes filled with tears. "I have nowhere to go." The words hit something deep inside Zanil. She remembered the night her mother had stood beside Patrick, cold and distant, telling her to leave her own home. She remembered the rain soaking her clothes as she walked away, heartbroken and lost. Now the roles were reversed. Her mother stood in the rain, asking for mercy. Zanil took a slow breath. For a moment, she thought about closing the door. She could have walked away, and no one would have blamed her. But something inside her, maybe her father's kindness, stopped her. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside. Miriam hesitated, then walked in slowly, her wet shoes leaving marks on the clean floor. She looked around the apartment. It was spotless and bright, nothing like the home she had once ruled. Her eyes landed on the framed photo of her late husband hanging proudly on the wall. She stared at it, her lips trembling. "This place looks beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. Zanil turned to her, her expression calm but firm. "You can stay here," she said slowly, "but not as my mother, as my tenant." Miriam's head snapped up, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Zanil, please don't say that," she begged softly. But Zanil didn't raise her voice or look away. "I have forgiven you," she said, "but things will never be the same. This home is mine now. If you stay, it's under my rules." Miriam nodded silently, her body shaking. "I understand," she whispered. Zanil handed her a towel and pointed to the spare room. "You can dry off in there," she said simply. As her mother disappeared down the hallway, Zanil stood still, her heart heavy but calm. She hadn't taken revenge, she had taken control. The pain that once destroyed her had turned into quiet strength. And as the rain continued to fall outside, she knew this was justice, not from anger, but from life itself. The evening sky over Nairobi glowed orange and gold as Zanil sat on the balcony, a cup of tea warming her hands. The city buzzed softly in the distance, children laughing, traffic humming, life moving on. Inside the apartment, her mother washed dishes quietly, her movements slow and careful. The woman who once ruled this home now barely spoke, her pride washed away by the weight of her own choices. Zanil watched the sun sink lower, feeling the cool breeze brush against her face. For months, she had carried so much anger, but now there was only calm. She didn't hate her mother anymore. She didn't need to. Life had already done what revenge never could. In her mind, she could almost hear her father's voice again, calm and wise. "Take care of what's yours, my girl," he used to say. She smiled faintly, realizing now that he hadn't just meant the house. He meant her peace, her dignity, her heart. Her eyes drifted toward the living room, where her father's framed photo hung proudly on the wall again. She stood up, walked inside, and placed a single fresh flower beside it. Her voice was soft but steady as she whispered, "Your home is mine again, Papa. And now I understand why you left it in my name." Behind her, Miriam stood silently, watching, her eyes glistening with regret. But Zanil didn't turn around. She didn't need to say anything more. As the last light of the day faded, the screen of this story would turn black with one final truth. She chose a man over me, but life chose justice. Some lessons don't need revenge, just time. And then in quiet white letters, "Never betray the one who remembers your beginnings. They might hold your ending."